Hi all, this is Abby. Welcome back to Sustainability. This is our second episode. Thank you for tuning in. Today is a little different from our standard structure because Karina and I have both prepared research on this topic and we're going to be discussing it together. We're unfortunately missing Maddie this month. Their schedule was just too jam-packed to join us, but they will be back for next month, so don't miss out. With the presidential election in the United States around the corner on November 5th, 2024, and many individuals having access to early voting, we wanted to talk a bit about the candidates. First, to be clear, we are not here today to tell you who to vote for. We have worked hard to make sure this information is impartial and not painted by our own bias. Even though we strive to provide accurate information about each candidate and not sway you in a particular direction, we are here to encourage you to vote and to be an educated voter. So we will be covering what the presidential candidates have made public about their stances on climate change initiatives. If you are interested in the candidates' other policies, I encourage you to do additional research. We will only be covering climate and environmental policies. And then finally, in the light of the recent attempts on former President Trump's life, we would like to be clear that the sustainability team does not support acts of violence against any candidate, regardless of how you personally feel about them. We view the act of voting as much more powerful than an act of violence. Alrighty. Karina, are you ready to kick us off?
Hi. Yeah, I'm Karina. Hi, welcome again to Sustainability. This would be my third election that I'm voting in. I turned 18 in 2016.
Presidential election or
presidential
like just
election.
any election?
Yeah. I guess I voted for a few of the midterm elections, but my first election ever, and my mom's first election that she ever voted in, was 2016, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. And so this would be my third. And then since my first time voting, I got really politically involved, especially with environmental activism. And so I just started volunteering. I've mentioned this before, but with Citizens Climate Lobby, that's where the bulk of my advocacy comes from. So what we do is we lobby the government. We make meetings with our congressional representatives, and we go to their offices, either in Zoom or in person. So I've been to DC 3 times to go to the not the White House, to go to the Capitol in person. The president does not want me. I was not invited to the White House.
Karina, knock, knock, knock on the White House door.
But yeah, so I quite like politics, and I have knocked door to door for candidates before, and that's fun. I like talking to people about things that matter to them, things that are passionate about them, and I like talking to people about climate because it's something that everyone is involved in. Everyone, I mean, it's a cliche. When you don't know about someone, you talk about the weather, and it's just climate and politics are very, very intertwined.
Unfortunately, at times.
So I'm kind of aware of the policies going in through the House more than the Senate stuff because I have only lobbied the House representatives. I've talked to, specifically for Florida, I've only lobbied for Florida politicians, and that's an interesting experience. How about you, Abby?
Yeah, so I grew up in a family who's super vocal about their thoughts on politics. It definitely catches some people off guard if they aren't expecting that and they come to a family dinner of mine and then my family just starts talking about politics at the dinner table. We're very casual about it. So I was always really excited to vote and do my civic duty. I was not able to vote in the 2016 election because my 18th birthday was the day after the 2016 election, so I was not eligible to vote.
No way.
I was so upset.
Oh my god.
Because I wanted to vote so bad. It felt like
your vote would have made a difference.
I felt like it was totally out of my control, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I've moved around a lot, so I voted in elections for Wisconsin and Oregon and New York, which is super cool because it feels like I'm making a big difference often in places that need my voice. But now I'm back in the Pacific Northwest, which is pretty liberal. I think they're going to vote one way despite my vote, but I'm still going to vote. That's not going to stop me.
Yeah, yeah. I grew up in and also a very vocal political family. Half my family is from Cuba, which is a communist country, and it's a very oppressed country. So that's always something that I grew up being around, being like, no, you have to vote. If you're going to live in a democracy, you have to vote because not everyone has that right, you know.
Yeah.
And
it's really like we refer to it as a right, but it's a privilege.
It is a privilege. It should be a right, but it is a privilege. Even your case shows you have to be 18 by a certain date. So today we're going to be talking about mostly Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. So as you probably know, Kamala Harris is a Democratic national candidate, the Democratic candidate on the ballot, and then Donald Trump is going to be the Republican candidate. And I know Abby has done a little bit more research on third parties.
We have a small section at the end where I wanted to highlight, I believe there's like 3 people who are running as third parties, but also it's important to note that just how our system is set up, there's almost no chance they'll win, but I wanted to give them their little moment.
Yeah. And you can vote for those people, although we won't be formally endorsing any candidate at the end of this episode. You have to kind of acknowledge that voting third party is probably, your vote is not going to go, it's not going to stretch as far as voting for one of the 2 major parties, which is unfortunate. It's unfair, but it's a reality.
Until we get national ranked choice voting, which is a whole nother discussion. But
oh my god, yes, that's what I want. Yes, absolutely.
A little just synopsis is like ranked choice voting is a way that can give more weight to third-party candidates than is currently in place with our system.
But we need to be honest with you and tell you the truth. That's something that we value a lot, is just being honest and truthful, no matter how difficult. That the 2 major parties, that is probably going to be a more worthwhile vote than the third parties.
Just unfortunately the system that the United States has in place.
So let's start with Kamala Harris. That is the candidate that I researched today. So she currently polls at 48.4% as of September 21st, 2024, which is when we're recording. And this is according to Project 538, which seems to be a resource with a bunch of polls. So as we all know, Kamala Harris is currently our vice president to Joe Biden. Let's start the conversation with, do they even believe in climate change? Do they believe in following the science and reason? And Kamala Harris, she does. She believes that climate change is human-made. In 2005, she said, and I'm quoting, "Crimes against the environment are crimes against the communities, people who are often poor and disenfranchised." So she does acknowledge that it is an issue. And here, I'm not going to put words in her mouth, but I think you can take away from that quote that she thinks that this is, a crime, something bad, something that is hurting people. So I think as an environmentally minded person, I think you need to look for a candidate who firstly acknowledges climate change is a real issue. It sounds like a small bar, but unfortunately, I know from personal experience from lobbying politicians, there are so many politicians who do not find climate change to be a concern. Either they don't believe it's real, they believe it's real, but it's not human made, which is essentially saying that we can't do anything about it. It's disempowering people. And a lot of them think it's real, it's just not a concern to me or to my constituents. And all of those are false. So that is, when I'm looking for someone to vote for, that's the first thing I look for.
Yeah. When I was looking up information on Donald Trump, it definitely seemed like he kind of acknowledges that climate change exists and is happening, but doesn't seem to believe that humans are a dominant factor in it happening. A lot of, when you're seeing kind of these climate change denier situations, it I feel like one of the larger ones you see will often be like, this is a natural cycle of the earth. Like, humans didn't cause this. We've been through ice ages, we've been through lots of things, but it's kind of disregarding that science that Karina was talking about, where we have seen evidence of human impact.
Yeah. And as an organization, sustainability believes that everybody in our audience, in the world, has a role in the solution. And I think that's a good thing to look for. If you don't believe that climate change has anything to do with us and you don't believe that we can solve it. I'm going to talk about some policies during Biden's administration that helped the environment. And it's Biden's administration, not Kamala's administration, but I still think that that should be part of her resume as well because she was vice president. First of all, the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act was huge. It was, I want to believe it was 2023. Kamala Harris for the Inflation Reduction Act was actually the tiebreaker vote. It was split perfectly down the middle, and as VP, she was a tiebreaker vote. So she really was the reason that this act went through. And the Inflation Reduction Act is the biggest environmental act that the country has ever seen. And so for me, that's a big check mark, right? So the Inflation Reduction Act is essentially a set of policies. It's not just one thing, it's a lot of things to kind of transform the economy and the grid to be more environmentally friendly. So there's lots of tax cuts, especially for like homeowners and just for like people like you and me. There's lots of tax cuts to greenify your home or to electrify your home. Essentially, it's trying to make it more affordable for us to be green. One thing that Harris did during 2019 is that she actually released a $10 trillion climate plan that I'm quoting this now from the Washington Post that calls for investing in renewable energy, holding polluters accountable, helping communities affected by climate change, and protecting natural resources. And so $10 trillion sounds like a lot of money, but it probably wouldn't be spent all at once. And we put a lot of money in other things like the military and stuff. This $10 trillion, it wouldn't just go to waste. This is an investment. And as president, she has said that she would continue the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. So she would keep the Inflation Reduction Act strong. There could be possibilities if there were another candidate that they could slash those, but she would continue them. One thing that I didn't know till I was researching, which I loved, I had no idea she did this, but what was she in California? As Attorney General in 2016, she actually sued ExxonMobil for misleading the public about climate change. So this was before she was running for president, so before that she was a politician. She was an attorney general. And I think that's amazing. The reason why is because that she sued them is because misleading the public. A lot of these big oil companies already knew about climate change, like back in the 70s. And they, since then, have been lying and misleading the public into thinking that either it wasn't as bad as it would be, or that the solution would be recycling and not, cutting on fossil fuels and things like that. They're intentionally misleading people, and that puts people in danger. So she actually sued them.
I mean, honestly, I didn't know that before. I really didn't know anything about Kamala before she was vice president. Honestly, I barely knew anything while she was vice president.
No, same here. Yeah, it wasn't really until, I learned a little bit about her during her last presidential race, but once she became vice president, she kind of fell off my radar,
Yeah.
So it really wasn't until I started, until the memes, first of all.
Truly, it's like exploded recently.
And then doing research for this episode, I didn't know any of this stuff. So I imagine a lot of you guys listening probably didn't know about this. Have you heard of the Green New Deal?
Kind of. I am not entirely sure what it entails, but I have heard of it. And I have like some notes from my research on Trump where he's definitely opposing it. Like he calls it the Green New Scam.
So I'm not going to go too much into the Green New Deal. So the Green New Deal is introduced by AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Okay, I think of her as AOC, and I met her once actually. I met her in the Capitol by an elevator when I was lobbying, and she was so sweet. She's small. She's so small. And the Green New Deal is a big, big, big plan to kind of greenify American society. So it goes into the economy, it goes into like social structures and things like that. It's huge. It's not perfect. I definitely think it's missing a few fundamental things, and it's also very idealistic, which is not a good or a bad thing. You know, it's just idealism has a place in society as long as it's, you know, backed by other things. Kamala Harris is actually, she was an early co-sponsor. I thought that was very cool because I've mostly heard like criticisms of the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal also includes a, quote, non-binding blueprint for transitioning the country to 100% clean energy within a decade. So it's an aggressive plan.
We need to be aggressive.
We do.
Just like politics aside, like just the science we're seeing of climate change, like we need to be aggressive to fight it.
The Green New Deal, one of its strengths is that it acknowledges the severity and the reality of the climate situation right now. And something that I learned is that she calls for a climate pollution fee, which is essentially a price on carbon. So that is my jam. I love a price on carbon. On my Instagram bio, it says hashtag price carbon. And I 100% will be doing a full episode on a price on carbon. And so she hasn't specifically backed any specific acts. So the one that I personally am in support for is a climate fee and dividend, which is where a price on carbon is you charge people or polluters for the carbon that they are putting into the atmosphere. You may have heard of cap and trade. That was a system that is a possibility that we've tried out. It doesn't tend to be as successful. So a cap and trade is where companies can have a certain amount, a certain limit on greenhouse gas emissions, and that's it. But they can trade with other corporations or other parties. And when I say parties, I don't mean political parties. I just mean like literal parties. So
organizations.
Yeah.
Groups.
Yeah, like organizations, groups. So there would be a limit on how many greenhouse gases are going into the atmosphere, but you are trading who does what, right? Tends to not be as straightforward or as effective as a carbon fee and dividend. And a carbon fee and dividend is you charge polluters for the carbon they're putting into the atmosphere. It starts off at a low price. You start low, and then you increasingly go up in price at a predicted rate. So there's not going to be any surprises. What this does is it would encourage companies to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And it would make everything more expensive if done kind of, it could. But there have been studies that show the price increases and it wouldn't actually be that bad. And the dividend part is all that money that you're collecting from people paying for their carbon, it goes back to the American people. It goes back to every single person in the country. And you would get a check. And it just gets split. That's it. There are some people who they have that plan. They're like a certain percentage will go into climate justice funds, climate justice projects, and the rest will go to people. But it is not a tax. It does not go to the government. It is a fee. It goes back to us. A lot of economists say, and a lot of a lot of experts say that a carbon fee and dividend is the most effective way to solve climate change. It gets a little bit more complicated. I'm not going to get into all of that today, but essentially, if she is supporting a climate pollution fee, a price on carbon, that could lead us into a carbon fee and dividend. So that's really exciting. Once I heard that, I was like, wow, that is really, really exciting because unfortunately, it's kind of hard to sell politicians on a carbon fee and dividend, even though it would, I know this from personal experience, a lot of people tend to shut it down for a lot of reasons, which I'll get into in a separate episode.
Yeah, well, part of it is probably just they're being backed by large businesses and they don't want to screw them over.
And also they don't understand it because a carbon fee and dividend can be done incorrectly or it could be done really, really well. And we essentially need a price on carbon. That is my opinion as an advocate, and it is the opinion of a lot of professionals and experts in the area.
Hashtag price on carbon.
Hashtag price on carbon, yes. And so that was really, really exciting. I feel like my face is lighting up now that I'm talking about a price on carbon. Another thing I want to talk about when that 2005 quote that I had mentioned earlier about crimes against the environment or crimes against communities, people who are often poor and disenfranchised. I think that's the first time that I've heard a major presidential candidate talk about climate justice and how climate change affects different populations differently. How certain populations are more negatively impacted by climate change. And I think that understanding is really crucial to having a more equitable solution to this, because you don't want to solve climate change just for the richest people in the world, or the richest people in your country. And I think sometimes environmentalism, like surface level environmentalism, once you talk to a lot of experts, they have a really good understanding of this. People who tend to forget the intersectionality of the climate crisis. And I think that's a really good sign if she actually is acknowledging that they are crimes and that they are crimes against certain people more than others.
Yeah, definitely. If you're interested in a candidate who backs climate issues, I definitely finding like Kamala's understanding of that intersectionality is a really good sign.
Yeah, I agree. Also, the Biden administration brought us back into the Paris Climate Agreement. So that's good. That shows that there is some sort of initiative to really take this seriously and to be part of a global effort. And at the 2023 UN Climate Summit, she said, and I quote, "The United States is proud to join more than 115 nations in a commitment to double energy efficiency and to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. And this kind of relates to me about the intersectionality portion, because the United States is a very individualistic country, especially compared to other countries. But we can't really solve climate change just for the United States, first of all. Like, we need to be part of something bigger than one country. We, as a human race, we need to do this. And climate change, we just posted something about this. Mark just posted something about this. Climate change is a global problem. It knows no borders. And we need global solutions. And I think that's a really good leadership quality to have, is to understand that you can't do it all. You need to collaborate with people. Oh, the Scientific American, I read an opinion piece by Scientific American, and the 179 years that they've existed, this is only the second time that they are endorsing a candidate, and it's Kamala Harris. One of the reasons why is because she, not just her policies, but also the attitude of listening to the science and having your actions be based on reason and on other people's expertise, like experts. And that's my stuff. That's what I got.
So I looked up information on Donald Trump's policies and like things he said. And because I mentioned earlier, he does not entirely focus his policies on greenifying everything like Kamala does. There's less information, but I will share with you what I have. So as of now, the same polling source as Kamala's, he is currently polling at 45.5%. So as of right now, at least, it's a pretty close race. So something that is pretty big in Donald Trump's proposed policies is he does want to have the United States be energy dominant, like in the world. Like he wants a really strong energy state. But he has said things like drill, baby, drill, that kind of puts me off as an environmentalist, because that's just like him clearly supporting the oil industry. And that's like a real quote. That's not me just being outrageous. It was during a July interview at the National Association of Black Journalists conference. Trump was asked, what he would do on day one of his administration if reelected, along with closing the US Mexico border, which we're not even going to get into right now. He said, drill, baby, drill, to increase domestic oil production. So clearly, where the candidates have very different stances right off. So I did read an article that stated he is in favor of expanding nuclear energy, which is not oil, which is good. It's often referred to in renewable energy discussions. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I don't know anything about nuclear energy. To my knowledge, that's clean energy.
Yeah, I don't know a ton about nuclear energy.
Hey y'all, this is Abby here from editing. Just to give you the 411 on nuclear energy, it is considered a clean energy and it's sustainable. So it protects air quality because it is a zero emission clean energy source. It creates energy through the process of nuclear fission. Its energy land footprint is super small, so you don't need a lot of land to create it. And then also it produces very minimal waste.
That's interesting. I had no idea that he, spoke positively about nuclear energy. Okay.
He did in the same conversation talk about how he thinks that nuclear energy would be beneficial to help put more energy towards AI because AI is taking up a lot of energy. So it's like one step forward, two steps back. Those are just like some starting points to kind of show where he stands. I found something back from his previous presidency. In 2017, he directed the EPA to remove all mentions of climate change from the website, which doesn't make any sense to me. But as of 2021, it was restored. It's back. But those are actions he took in his presidency, not very climate forward. I mentioned earlier how Trump calls the Green New Deal the Green New Scam. So a Trump campaign spokesperson, so this isn't a quote from Trump himself, this is one of his spokespeople, told Newsweek that President Trump has said he wants to utilize all forms of energy, while Comrade Kamala wants to demonize energy producers as she peddles her Green New Scam. So this is one of the point of views that I think more conservative individuals tend to fall into the trap of, because at times Trump will say things like he wants to utilize all forms of energy, which kind of means he's open to more renewable energy, but he doesn't want to get rid of like oil and gas and stuff, and kind of goes on to the attack to Kamala to say because she wants to decrease these oil productions, she's the bad guy. Trump's the good guy because he's trying to embrace it all.
So I'm a little bit confused as someone who hasn't done any research on Trump. What is he in support of? It just sounds like he's not being very clear about what he wants.
Yes.
That
is what I found a lot of the case. It seems very much like it's a wide net trying to say that he is like the candidate of America, where he is supporting all of these things, but Kamala doesn't want to support everything.
Okay.
As we discussed with yours, she has specific reasons for why she is supporting specific things, and it seems like more he's trying to play a broad field.
Yeah, like as a communications professional, it sounds to me like he wants the voter to think of him as whatever they want him to be, instead of being something clear and solid and concise and specific. Because haven't done any research at all, but I'm having trouble knowing his opinions on things.
Yeah, I did go through his actual policy information on his campaign website. So I can go over that really quick because I think that'll be helpful.
Okay.
Because in general, a lot of the like news articles feel very broad or very just like provocative.
Yeah, it might be difficult to cover a candidate like that.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the first part. So there's still not a lot. It's still much less than what Kamala has put out. But here is some information I found from Donald Trump's platform from his website. So not like other news sources. So under President Trump, the US became number one producer of oil and natural gas in the world, and we will soon be again by lifting restrictions on American energy production and terminating the socialist Green New Deal. Republicans will unleash energy production from all sources, including nuclear, to immediately slash inflation and power American homes, cars, and factories with reliable, abundant, and affordable energy. So, with that section, it's very much kind of targeting affordability, so which is one of the downsides we talked about of a possibly, like, if Kamala's plan isn't implemented well, it being more expensive. Abundant, not being worried about having access to fuel and such. So it's definitely targeting that individual aspect instead of many what more environmental activists are looking for like planet focused things.
And also, I want to point out that he's misusing the word socialist in regards to the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is not socialist. Socialism is a philosophy where the government takes a lot more control of resources than capitalism. Not to an extreme extent, but the Green New Deal is a non-binding blueprint. And it's more so on transitioning to clean energy versus the government having too much of a hand in anything.
So the next section I found from his website says, common sense tells us clearly that we must unleash American energy if we want to destroy inflation and rapidly bring down prices, build the greatest economy in history, revive our defense industrial base, fuel emerging industries, and establish the United States of manufacturing superpower of the world. We will drill, baby, drill, and we will become energy independent and even dominant again. The United States has more liquid gold under our feet than any other nation, and it's not even close. The Republican Party will harness the potential of power to power our future.
Does he have any evidence to back up this liquid gold statement? I'm assuming he means oil.
I am also assuming he means oil. I think he just means we have oil under the ground in the country.
But he doesn't provide a comparison, like any data?
Not that I can remember. It was definitely just these large statements to kind of, I think, evoke a reaction in his audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like I'm criticizing him more than Kamala, because we have criticized some things in the beginning of this episode, but
and we are looking, and I'd like to make it clear, we're not criticizing either candidate. We are looking specifically at their environmental policies from an environmentalist perspective. Mm-hmm. So like a candidate like this in general is going to receive more critique from us.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like I'm being biased, but Kamala doesn't make statements like that where she gives facts of that. She more gives policies and predictions as to how those policies would work. And she supports policies. That's kind of how her campaign has been going, versus we have more liquid gold in other countries. This is socialist. This is whatever, So I just wanted to clear that up as to why my approach might sound more aggressive towards him than her, because their communication styles are totally different.
Yes. And then the final little chunk I had taken from his website says Republicans will increase energy production across the board, streamlining permitting and market distorting restrictions on oil, natural gas, and coal. The Republican Party will once again make America energy independent and then energy dominant, lowering energy prices even below record lows achieved during President Trump's first term. So I think it's just very clear, like you were saying, these two candidates, I think a big difference is their communication styles. So Trump is clearly targeting his audience with information that's supposed to make them think about their own place in like the energy they have access to versus Kamala's more widespread environmental justice outlook, I think.
I think that's a good analysis. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I see it. Yeah. And then, but just like from an environmentalist standpoint, I think it's hard to reach environmentalists when you are just saying, we are going to make America energy dominant.
Especially when we were talking about how this is a global problem. You know, you can't win climate change. That's not really the point.
And
You know,
I don't really know what energy dominant means. Like, you want to be if you want to be energy independent, I understand you don't want to take energy resources from other countries because that might be more expensive. But does dominant mean you are then selling energy sources back to other countries and you are on top? Or
I know, yeah, because dominance means asserting power over someone, not necessarily helping them or aiding them. So I have a master's in global strategic communications, and that's kind of what I was saying before about his strategy is I am whatever candidate you want me to be. Because I use these words that aren't very clear, and I leave room for interpretation. Like even we're confused as to what he means by that. Oh, he could mean this, he could mean that. Whereas, for example, with Kamala, it's I supported, you know, these policies. I sued ExxonMobil because they were misleading people, or like those are like clear actions that she has done. You know.
okay, going from broad to like really specific, you watched the recent debate.
I did, yes.
Why? For those of you who didn't have the chance to watch,
The privilege to
watch. We watched it for you, don't worry. And this goes for both candidates because it was just former President Trump and Vice President. They specifically, the moderators brought up that environmentalism and climate is very important to young voters. And then they spent very little time talking about it.
Yes.
Compared to everything else. But ultimately their conversations came back to electric cars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I am baffled by that.
Yeah. Because like this is one of the greatest problems of our species, and it deserves more than 5 minutes, you know? And it was just a sentence on fracking, and then it boiled down to electric cars. And it's just it's a little bit narrow-minded because we could have less cars and more walkability and, you know,
better transit
systems and things like that. They're just so, environmentalism is more than electric cars. I'm not even against electric cars or anything like that. It's just that it's a big, big world out there of solutions, and yet it seems like Americans can only comprehend cars and a car-centric society.
And then finally, Trump does not officially say he stands with Project 2025, but there are many sources linking him to Project 2025. So it's very safe to say that these policies would be looked at very heavily if former President Trump was reelected. So I wanted to kind of go over what some of Project 2025 says in its rhetoric about the climate crisis. So Project 2025 says that the next conservative administration needs to, quote, stop the war on oil and natural gas and support an all of the above energy policy. So once again, we're back to that. We'll support everything, even though it's very much pushing back on renewable energy sources. But their plan includes preventing federal regulations from considering the economic impact of carbon emissions, abolishing the Energy Department's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy and Loan Programs Office, which funds cutting-edge energy and manufacturing projects, eliminating energy efficiency standards for appliances, ending subsidies for electric vehicles, withdrawing the country from initiatives for sustainable food production, and rescinding climate policies from foreign aid programs.
Yeah, I almost don't know how to respond to that because I don't want to sound unaffected by this because that's shocking to hear. I don't want to be super alarmist, but that's alarming, and I don't want to not give it just the reaction that it deserves. Which is that is a lot. That is insane stuff.
Absolutely. The plan also calls for repealing Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So, like we said earlier, especially the Inflation Reduction Act, has done a lot for climate. And essentially, and like I said, Trump has not formally aligned himself with 2025, but because of all the excess sources linking him or his possible candidacy to it, it's reasonable to look at this as something in line with what he supports, even though they're all also trying to put forth that they want to support all kinds of energy.
Yeah. So, Project 2025, in a nutshell, would be disastrous. Not just for social reasons that you've probably heard in the media, but also for climate reasons. And if Donald Trump, he's not being clear about whether he is aligned with it or not, and I think that is dangerous. Do with that information what you will.
So before we go on to third-party candidates, to just give you an idea of what else is out there in a future possible world where hope still lives, I want to horrify Karina a little bit with one last thing Trump has said.
You love doing that to me.
This is only going to horrify her from like a personal state. Something that we talked about earlier is that climate is this intersectional issue that impacts lots of people. And from what I've seen, Trump doesn't seem to recognize that, especially from this. He said at one point that sea level rise just means more beachfront property, which is very alarming.
Telling me I could live in a beachfront property where I'm like an hour away from the beach? That could be me.
Yes. So for me, that just disregards the struggle that many individuals face and shows that you want to protect the rich.
And also, it increases our property taxes and our insurance, or like a property insurance and things like that. So something to keep in mind, property insurance, that's going to cost us as people. This more beachfront, climate change is expensive.
If you're someone who maybe the health of the planet isn't like your first goal when voting, but you are very concerned about the cost of living or the prices that you will experience, climate change will not just give you more beachfront property. Like Karina said, it is going to increase your cost of living. It's going to increase your taxes. It's going to increase your insurance.
And that's something that we are currently already dealing with. So imagine if things get worse.
So clearly there is a different approach both of these candidates are taking, and we are trying really hard not to tell you who to vote for, but to just be very cognizant of the information they are actively putting out into the world. But before we sign off, I wanted to give you a little idea, because third-party candidates, even though personally I will not be voting for them just because of the system we are in, they give me hope to what people still care about in the world.
And historically, third-party candidacy has been really good at making public the people's concerns that aren't represented in the major two candidates, even if they don't. I mean, like Bernie Sanders, he was not going to be president as an independent. I know he ran as a Democrat, but like he was always been a third party politician. But now his ideas are out there, and they're, I wouldn't say normalized, but they're very public, and people talk about them and know about them.
Yeah. So definitely they're still fighting the good fight and are worth highlighting in this moment. So, like the others candidates I mentioned how they're polling, I'm going to talk about 3 candidates really quick, but unfortunately, they are collectively polling around 1.6%. So like we said, this is pure data that shows their unlikelihood of going much farther. First, we have, I think it's Colonel West. He is unaffiliated with a party currently, but he is super environmentally focused. So, like I said with the other two candidates, I'm just talking about these are all information taken from their candidate websites and what they have stated about their environmental stance, not any of their other policies. So, he is super environmentally focused and really recognizes that it's a forefront issue. So, these are some things that he would do. He would recognize the constitutional right to a healthy environment. He would halt fossil fuels. He would declare a climate emergency, which would be amazing. It would just really recognize that this is the state we're in. He is for climate reparations.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that.
Yeah. I haven't looked too much in it before, but I'm assuming it's like similar to the environmental justice line where you're like helping support people who've been overly affected.
Okay. Definitely something that we'll look into more. That's really interesting.
Yeah. He would cancel harmful projects and rescind harmful legislation. And I don't have a lot of time to discuss him, so this is just a short amount about him. And then our second third-party candidate is Jill Stein. She's with the Green Party. So they are the ones who are typically super environmentally focused like that. And truly, the list of information I have about her, what she would do is so small compared to what's actually on her website. So even if you're just interested, I would go say, check it out. So the health of the planet is one of the central tenets of the Green Party, if you are unaware. She puts forth that she would want to put in the real Green New Deal. So in their eyes, the Green New Deal that is currently, we talked about earlier, is not enough. That they say they need an economic democracy of an eco-socialist, real Green New Deal to plan and coordinate the complicated transition to 100% clean energy and zero emissions on the rapid timescale required to save the planet. She would also declare a climate emergency. She would create an office of climate mobilization, which I think is a really cool idea, and I think could definitely happen if you pressure any candidate enough. And that feels reasonable. And like a lot of these things we're talking about, I think it's important to note, I don't know why I'm noting this at like almost the end, but everything these people are putting forth is all just a promise that they'll do or try to do before they get into office. But we in the United States have a series of checks and balances. So it's really will depend if and what people can get done. But that's where a lot of the sway you as the constituents have in, and what like rural Karina's done a lot is like advocating and lobbying for certain things.
Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely.
Her goal would be to achieve 100% clean and renewable energy. She's also for climate reparations. She would strengthen the Environmental Protection Act and incentivize zero waste manufacturing. So, like I said, just a tiny tip of the iceberg for what she and the Green Party is all about.
Very cool. I like all of that.
Yeah. And then finally, we have Chase Oliver, who is with the Libertarian Party. And by far, I think he has the best slogan. It's time to chase your dreams.
I love that. I read that just now and I was like, brilliant. Wonderful.
Like, what a bold move. And his name's Chase. Amazing. Just wanted to put that out there. So the Libertarian Party historically wants smaller governments. He's put forward less about climate initiatives, but he has said that nuclear power is greater than fossil fuels. It's cleaner, safer, and more efficient, and helps curb the negative effects of climate change. Solar and wind and others also have their places too, but nuclear power is what we need to power the 21st century. And then his website also states that Chase will transform environmental policy by slashing red tape and embracing market-driven, science-backed solutions. His plan ends wars, respects tribal sovereignty, ensure energy independence, and champion smart deregulation.
I love that.
So even though it's definitely, if you look at all three of their websites, his is definitely has the least amount of climate or energy topics. It's definitely, even with this short few sentences, it packs a lot. And you can tell where he stands compared to how we were kind of confused when going through where Donald Trump stood on things.
I love how this is the first candidate I've heard mention respect tribal sovereignty. That's actually one of the greatest pitfalls of the Inflation Reduction Act, that it doesn't do that enough. And so I love hearing that from a candidate. And I wish I had heard it from all the candidates, but unfortunately not.
And like I said, at least for the other third-party candidates, they had a lot more information of things they support. So there may be things on their websites that I missed or didn't include. But definitely for when I was researching Trump, I didn't see anything about that on where he stood.
I am so glad we went over third-party candidates because they're going to be on your ballot. And so you should know what they're about. But also, you might see them on your ballot in the future for another election, for some, local elections, for your Senate or for your House. And I think it's good to have that knowledge as well.
Yeah. And I think I just really want to push home the idea that even though, like we've said, disappointingly, they will likely not win this presidential election, if you resonate with their policies, you can still help push for those. And you can connect with other work they've done, or find, if they are in the Senate or the House, you can see what bills they support. You can call your representatives, contact them, and still push for those things that you want to support, even if they don't make it as far in this presidential election.
And even if they won't be president, a lot of these people still will be around, so you can still support their careers, and you can see how, what policies of the current president or the future president they support, and use that as kind of a gauge as to whether you support that policy or not. I think this is really good information. I'm glad that Abby covered this. Thank you, Abby.
Of course. Yeah. And then finally, we're not going to talk through it right now, but we will make sure to include on our website and social media links to how to register if you are not currently registered.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Check us out.
We have a new website.
We do. We have a website.
Yes.
It is up. You will find information about us and the organization, and we will have episode notes for each episode with a transcript and sources if you want to double check us.
And our website is sustainability.podcast.com. And it's beautiful. Mark put so much hard work into it. It's gorgeous.
Yes. And then our social media that we have right now that are active are Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. We're trying to be professionals.
Being linked influencers. So thanks for joining us, everyone. I hope this made it a little bit easier to, because this is going to be a pretty big election and there's so much information out there. So hopefully we can provide the service of just making it a little bit easier to decide who you're going to vote on if the environment is one of your top concerns.
Please listen, like, subscribe.
Share.
That is a huge support as we are new and growing. So stay tuned.
And if any of your friends are undecided, share this episode with them.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. Thanks again, everyone.
All right. Bye.
This episode of Sustainability was written and researched by Abby Bender and Karina Taylor. Produced by Abby Bender. Music produced by Maddie Foley. And art for this episode was designed by Margaret Degnan.